Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about identity theft, hackers, financial crime, intrigue, and the Internet of Things. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Well, it is, but maybe not for the reasons that you're thinking right now. You see, I've been a victim of data breaches and identity theft, and while it has been pretty exciting, I have to say it's been for all the wrong reasons. About a year ago, my personal information was stolen from a company that I do business with. In fact, more than one. And what started out as a hassle, having to get new credit cards, set up new bill pay, change my recurring payments, quickly got worse as the realization set in that the criminals had much more information about me. First, a new account was opened with a bank that I don't do business with. I know this because I received a welcome package in the mail about this new account. Clearly, the criminals were still learning how to do their business. So when a situation like this happens, I took all of the right steps that you should take when that happens. I called the company and I told them the account had been opened fraudulently, and I closed it. I placed fraud flags on all 3 credit bureaus. I filed a police report. I filed a complaint with the FTC. I changed all my account names and passwords on my accounts because I didn't know what other information the criminals had on me. And even taking all of those steps, not long after, they were back. And this time, they were able to gain access to one of my financial accounts and commit financial fraud. And the story continues, but let's look at some data on the subject. In 2015, dataloss.org reported that over 700 million records of information had been compromised. Just a year earlier, the FBI reported that over 500 million records of information had been compromised. That's a nearly 50% increase in 1 year alone. Now, let me put that number in perspective. If we assume there are about 250 million adults in the United States today, then that means that 5 records of data have been compromised for every adult in this venue tonight. Welcome to my club. Now, when the data that's compromised is a user ID and password, things get a little more challenging. Data loss reported that 38% of the time in all that data that was compromised, the data that was compromised was a user ID and password. Houston, we have a problem. That's especially true because a survey done by CSID showed that 61% of respondents admitted to reusing their user ID and password across multiple websites. They're using the same security credentials everywhere they do business. Now, I'm normally a fan of reduce, reuse, and recycle, but in the case of passwords, I have to say, don't do that. Identity theft is even more impactful. The criminals are out to get the keys to our identity, our social security number. Once they have our social security number and other personal information, they're able to commit financial fraud, open accounts, ruin our credit, and more. In 2014, 17 million consumers were victims of financial fraud. Just like me, it turns out. What kind of fraud do they commit? Well, they sell the data to others that want to commit financial fraud. So one piece of the business, which is really big, is getting the data, and the other piece of the business is selling the data to the folks that want to commit financial fraud. Here's a terrifying example. In 338,000 cases last year, the IRS reported that individuals had their entire tax record compromised from the IRS service Get Transcript. You probably see where this is going, but back to my story. So on a cold spring day in Minnesota, i.e. a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from my tax preparer telling me that my tax returns had been rejected by the IRS because someone had already filed tax returns on my account. Great, so now I'm also a victim of tax fraud. He went on to explain that this is actually pretty common and that they have a process in place to deal with it, and that I shouldn't worry. Not worry? Are you kidding me? It's 2016 and we rely on the internet almost exclusively to shop, find a cool restaurant, socialize with our friends, get concert tickets, submit our papers for review. And yet it's 2016 and we still rely on the same security technology that was around when the internet was invented, predominantly the user ID and the password. There has to be a better way. Our digital footprints are about to get a lot bigger with the Internet of Things or smart devices. What do I mean by that? Well, imagine a smart refrigerator that is able to keep track of your supplies and reorder them and have them delivered when you run low. Or maybe the fitness tracker that you might be wearing tonight, keeping track of your steps and counting your calories consumed. Or a smart energy meter that's helping you manage your energy consumption more effectively. These all fall under the umbrella of Internet of Things or smart devices, and they're expected to grow exponentially. Under the current model, all of these things have some element of our personal information in them. Why does your thermostat need to know your name and address? So that's a real issue. And as the threat increases, as the number of places that our data is stored. And so this is a real problem that needs to be solved. As a Chief Innovation Officer, I have the privilege of leading a team of visionaries that imagine what might be. They think about the art of the possible. They study emerging technologies and trends, and they imagine how we might simplify our customers' lives in building products and services. Data privacy and security are critically important. We're a bank, so that should make a lot of sense, right? So when we think about this, we're trying to think about how could we help solve this problem in the digital era? How could we create a digital identity and help manage digital identities for our customers and for others? Let me explain what I mean. It's pretty unusual for someone to ask you for this, to open a social media account. You may not know this, but financial institutions by law have to verify the identity of people that do business with us. So we have to make sure that the person is who they purport to be. And there are regulations and laws in place that ensure that. But you don't need to have one of those to open a social media account. Yet, how do you know that the person you're interacting with on social media is actually who you think they are? You don't. And I'm not necessarily going to solve that problem tonight, but the solution I'm proposing in the framework could solve that problem into the future. Now, let me offer a couple of suggestions and catch you up a little bit on what's happening in the industry more broadly. First of all, you're probably familiar with the advent of mobile payments and have heard about or maybe using Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Android Pay, and the like. What you may not know is that the payment credentials that are stored on that mobile device are actually what we call tokenized. So the account number that's on that device is different than the number that's on the plastic that might be in your wallet or in your purse. It's also bound to the mobile device, which means that when it's used for a transaction, if it came from anything other than the mobile device, we know that it's fraud. The risk of theft has been greatly reduced as a result. There's some other important work happening in the digital identity space under a White House initiative called the National Strategies for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, or NSTIC. It's quite a mouthful. Under that initiative, the government and enterprise are collaborating to try to solve this problem and develop digital identity ecosystems. And both of these are important steps in the right direction, but they won't completely solve the identity problem. And the reason is because it isn't clear who can create a digital identity and vouch for you and me, say that we are who we say they are. And so what I'm proposing is that financial institutions, because of their obligations in knowing their customers, are uniquely positioned to be able to do something like that in a digital ecosystem. But you actually have to have an entire ecosystem. So what do I mean? You need a system that has broad reach and is widely accessible across a number of platforms and services. We need to leverage existing technologies and expertise if we hope to do this anytime soon. We need to enable support for anonymous and pseudo-anonymous use. What do I mean? If you wanted to participate in social media or comment on a news article or discuss things in a chat forum, you shouldn't have to put your personal information at risk in order to do so if it isn't legally required. But yet at the same time, the companies that provide those services need to be able to comply with federal laws like child data protection laws. So they might need to be able to verify your age, but they may not need to know your name and birth date. We also need transparency of data collection. I mentioned the Internet of Things and our data being everywhere. Our data is everywhere, and you probably don't even know it. So we need to understand before data is collected that it's being collected and why. A system such as this needs to be robust, highly secure, have backup and recovery. Oh, and while we're at it, it needs to be cost-effective, too. Now, how might a system like this work? Let's use a made-up company name, Voter. Voter is a hot new video streaming service that has the latest and greatest content faster than everybody else, and so you want to sign up. Under the current model, you would go to Voter and you would register and you would provide your name and your address and your birth date and your phone number and your credit card and your expiration date and your security code and more. And then you would trust Voter to keep that information safe. It's worked out pretty well for me so far. Under the future model, you would go to Voter and you would use your digital identity key that's been securely stored, for example, on your mobile device. You would authenticate the voter via your bank, and all Voter would know is, one, a bank has vouched for you, verified your identity. Two, that you're over 18 years of age, but not your birth date. The region of the world you're coming from, so they can comply with licensing and copyright laws. And a tokenized version of your payment credentials, only good for use on the Voter site. So you can see in this example, none of the data is useful to the criminals. The risk of theft has been virtually eliminated. Now let's talk about the IRS example. In the case of the IRS, they already have your data. They just need to be able to decide whether or not you're the one that should get access to it. And so similarly, you could use a solution like that only for the verification step in order to be able to get granted access to accounts. A solution like this is not science fiction. In fact, our friends to the north in Canada have been using a solution like this to grant access to their tax information by authenticating to the financial institutions in Canada. A secure digital future is in our sight, but we can't do it alone. It requires broad collaboration with federal and state government, financial institutions throughout the U.S., education, business community, and more. I hope that someday identity theft is a thing of the past and we can sleep a little bit better knowing that our information is secure. I know I sure will. Thank you.